Find the inverse of this function. We have f of x equals x squared minus 1, but notice that we restricted the domain to x greater than 0. So we want to sketch the graph of each and then find the domain and range of each. Okay. Now this function x squared minus 1, right? Hopefully by now you have a pretty good idea of what that graph looks like. Okay, so the x squared graph, you know, is just our basic parabola. Okay, it's a nice little U shape. And this minus 1 tells us to shift that graph down 1 unit. Okay. Now here, I'm going to do this. I'm going to draw this U shape here. Okay. So we should look a little something like this, right? This is the parabola x squared minus 1. But wait a minute. We notice, okay, it passes the vertical line test, which makes it a function, but it does not pass the horizontal line test, right? Which means it does not have an inverse. So this is the key right here, right? Notice what this means. It means, okay, wait a minute. I'm only going to take the values for this function where x is greater than 0. Okay, so what does that mean? It means we're only going to take essentially the right side of this function. Okay, so instead of drawing the whole function, right? Okay, the whole u, right? We're only going to take this side. Okay, so let's draw it like this. This should be an open circle because we're not going to include 0 there. And then we'll draw just the 1/2. Okay, this side of the u. Now you notice that this does pass the horizontal line test, so this part of the function does have an inverse. Okay, so that happens pretty often here, right? Over the whole domain, the function may not have an inverse, but hey, let's just restrict the domain so that it does pass the horizontal line test, which means it does have an inverse. Okay. Now notice for f of x, okay, the domain. Okay, we know what that is, right? It's 0 to infinity. You notice 0 with the parentheses because we don't have that line underneath, right? Notice what is the range here. The range is -1, but remember, we don't include -1, so that's why we put that as a parentheses, and we go up till infinity. Okay. Now, how are we going to find the inverse then, right? There's a couple ways to do this. Okay. But I'm sorry, there's only one. I was thinking about the graph, right? But let's find the inverse, right? So we'll replace f of x with y. So we get y equals x squared minus 1. Second step is let's replace y with x and replace x with y. So that becomes y squared minus 1. And now we have to solve for y. So let me add 1 to both sides. So x plus 1 equals y squared. And what's the last thing we're going to do here in order to solve for y, right? Remember, this is a y squared. We don't want that. So we should take the square root of both sides. So y is equal to plus or minus radical x plus 1. Now it's plus or minus because of this. We're taking the square root of y squared, okay? But notice, if we drew this, right? If we drew this, we would get both sides of the parabola. But remember, that's what we've done. We've sort of taken only half of it, okay? So that tells us then that we're only going to take the positive side here, okay? So only the positive side of x, the radical x plus 1. Okay? Which means what? Well, the radical function shifted to the left 1 unit. So we're going to go a little something like this. Okay? So the function in blue here, that's the original function. And the graph in green, that is the graph of our inverse. Okay? Now let's take a look. What is the domain of our inverse function? Looking at the graph, you should be able to tell, right? The domain is what? -1 to infinity. And what is the range? The range of our inverse then is the y values. We start at 0, 0 to infinity. Okay. Look at that. Look at the domain and range of the function and look at the domain and range of the inverse. What do you notice? We notice that they're switched, right? The domain of the function is equal to the range of the inverse. And the range of the function is equal to the domain of the inverse. That should always happen. And we notice one more thing here. Look at the graph, right? If you draw the line y equals x, then these two graphs are just mirror images of each other, right? The function and the inverse should be mirror images across this line here, y equals x. And that is another property of functions that you need to remember.